All right, so this lecture is related to the homeostasis. I will go over the homeostasis, tell you what is it, and two ways in which we can regulate the homeostasis, negative feedback and positive feedback. We will discuss that. And then after that, I will give you a few examples. All right. So homeostasis is maintaining internal condition the same. All right. So even though outside condition might be different, we wanted to maintain the homeostasis at all level. Maintaining homeostasis means keeping things in equilibrium or balance. All right. Everything in the body requires to be balanced. All right. So we need to we need to balance the uh, the amount of air we breathe. You cannot, if you don't have enough oxygen, you're going to suffocate. That needs to be balanced. The amount of oxygen and carbon dioxide in our blood needs to be balanced. All right. if you exercise if you exercise, your body produces more carbon dioxide. In order to balance the carbon dioxide and oxygen in your body, your respiratory rate is going to be increased. In other words, when you exercise, you breathe faster and more frequently. What does that do? What does that do? You're trying to achieve homeostasis now. In other words, you're trying to balance. The oxygen is reduced because you are consuming them, because your muscle cells need more oxygen to work. On the other hand, you're also producing more carbon dioxide. So by frequently breathe more often, that by itself is going to balance things out, right? So you're achieving homeostasis. In this case, you're balancing the amount of gases that you need within the body. All right. So all the organ system, they are playing a role in some kind of a homeostatic role. What that means, they try to balance something. All right. I wanted to have you guys to think about this a little bit longer. All right. And maybe outside of this lecture, you could go back and look at the different organ system and see if you can identify what is it that you're trying to keep balance. All right. But right now, uh, I would like to give you guys uh, the components, or the components of the control mechanism. There are three general components. One is a receptor. Receptor is detecting. What is it detecting? Detecting the things that are not normal, abnormal. Going back to my previous example, if you're exercising, the amount of carbon dioxide in your blood vessel is going to rise. All right. So pretend that this is the blood vessels, let's say aorta, carotid arteries, and the amount of carbon dioxide inside is higher. Because why? You're exercising. When you're exercising, what is happening is the cells here, these are representing the cell nearby the blood vessel. They produce more carbon dioxide and they consume oxygen. So here you're going to have a lower oxygen and carbon dioxide. Because carbon dioxide is high, then they seep in here. Here you have opposite. You have carbon dioxide is lower generally, and you have oxygen that is low, high. So oxygen goes from high to low, and so you're delivering the oxygen. Carbon dioxide goes from high to low as well. So you're going there. So what it's going to do? Well, now that the carbon dioxide moved in here, you have higher amount of carbon dioxide in the blood vessel system. So what does that do? Now, let me go ahead and erase some of these parts so you don't get it confused. All right. So carbon dioxide is inside. There are, chemoreceptors. Chemoreceptors are, there are certain chemoreceptors that they detect the chemical changes in our blood. A little bit later on, when we talk about the respiratory system, we can dissect this further, but it detects the amount of carbon dioxide, huh? Once it detects it, that's receptor. In this case, it's a chemoreceptor. It's called chemoreceptor because it detects chemicals. That's all, right? So I just wanted to show you, yes, they exist. There are pressure receptors, there are pain receptors, there are thermoreceptors, there are mechanoreceptors, there are many different type of receptors in our body, but they detect different things. In this case, they're detecting the chemicals, right? Now we're going to a control center. Control center determines the set point. What is the set point? What is the amount of oxygen supposed to be? And the amount of carbon dioxide. What is it supposed to be? All right. So, for example, if you have partial pressure of 100, you know, uh, a partial pressure of 100 millimeter a G, all right, that's the amount that you have. Don't worry about those numbers, but there are certain control center. That means what is the amount of oxygen? The amount of oxygen in here is balanced. This is O2. But as they deliver more and more oxygen because you're working harder, now the oxygen is going to fall, all right? Same thing with the carbon dioxide. Previously, when I put in this signal right here, that means they are balanced. Carbon dioxide is balanced. Kind of like a, balance beam right here. You know, if like a seesaw in the park, if it's balanced, they stay like this way. You know, if it's tilted one way, this part goes down, this part goes up, for example, right? So it's kind of like that. So carbon dioxide is supposed to be balanced. There's a certain amount of partial pressure that needs to be there. Right now, I'm not going to throw in a whole bunch of numbers to get you confused, but that's what is happening. But during the exercise, that is going to be higher now because of the event that I just told you. So control center detects that, all right, because of the receptor. You know what it's supposed to be, all right? Then as a result of that, effectors kick in. What is the effectors? Effectors usually are glands and muscle. So when you are doing the respiration faster, what is it that you do? You breathe faster. There are a lot of respiratory control muscles that are working, intercostal, diaphragm, your chest muscles, pectoralis minor, all of those are the muscles that are involved in breathing, if you recall. Glands also involved, but in this case, it's just muscle. So what is happening? You are increasing the rate so that way you could eliminate the carbon dioxide more and oxygen more. So after you do that, when you breathe a lot faster, you're going from low back to the high again. All right. And same thing with the carbon dioxide. If it's high, when you breathe out faster, guess what? You're going to get to a lower amount of carbon dioxide. Okay. So, therefore, in order to respond, usually if something is high, we like to lower it. In this case, carbon dioxide was high, we lowered it. All right. If something is low, we like to make it higher. In this case, oxygen in our blood was low. Now we increased it, right? So this is called a negative feedback. Negative feedback is counteracting the change. The change in this case was amount of gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen. They went high and low respectively. And the negative feedback is exactly opposite of that. You're trying to bring back to what? To whatever that number was, all right? Whatever this number was. Now, this is involved in the respiratory system, all right? There are many, many different examples that you could think about, all right? There is a homeostatic role in digestive system. There is a homeostatic role in cardiovascular system. Think about your blood pressure. Everybody know 120 over 80, that's supposed to be normal, right? But what if it goes higher? Why is it that it goes higher? Well, maybe you had too much salt. Maybe you had something else in your food that it went up. but you need to bring it back down, because if it keeps going up, you're going away from the set point, what is normal. And that could cause the problem, because if the pressure keeps going up and up and up, guess what? The blood vessels is going to burst. All right, we don't want that. What if it drops? Again, if it drops, that's problematic. If you have a bleeding somewhere, it keeps dropping. All right, but you need to do something about it, like probably put pressure on the bleeding part, right, to stop it from keep going down. So again, what we're trying to do is maintain. That's our set point. This is probably a control center to be at this range. All right. A lot of brain involves in maintaining that. Again, there are pressure sensors in the blood vessels. Those are receptor. And the effector would be probably, blood vessels. They can get dilated. They can get here. There is a blood vessel. They can get dilated, increasing diameter or decreasing diameter. So most likely, if your normal diameter in here, and if the blood pressure is going higher, 140 over 90, for example, now do you want to, what do you want to do? You want to lower it. So how do we lower that? Well, vasodilation may occur. When you dilate the blood vessel, this diameter by itself right there, all right, assuming that is larger diameter now, right, that is going to do that. Now, how is that possible to dilate or constrict? Well, there is a smooth muscles in here, and this smooth muscle, it allows the contract or constrict or dilate. If you recall, again, I keep coming to the anatomy. All right. If you recall, these there were smooth muscles in the tunica media of the blood vessels, especially the arteries, and that was responsible for dilation and constriction. There were three regions: tunica media, tunica intima or interna, and tunica externa. All right, and that's what it was. All right, moving right along. The negative feedback is always counteracting the change. In other words, you're just going to the opposite direction, to the limit, by the way. They work in the certain range, all right? They cannot work and keep increasing or decreasing something. Like notice, like when you're breathing faster and so on, once you achieve what you wanted to do, you're not going to continue breathing faster, because you're going to do a negative feedback and you're going back to normal now, right? A good example of it would be temperature. A temperature is another one that you guys can think of. Like when you're exercising, your body temperature also goes up, all right? But you don't want that, because the body temperature, when it goes up, it's kind of like you have a fever and you will not be able to do much, just like you have a fever. So you need to lower the body temperature. Body temperature was up, all right? You need to do lowering it. That's negative feedback, all right? Well, how do we do that? Well, first of all, you got to know when the body temperature is going up. So, in the brain, you have hypothalamus that is, and other areas that are responsible for detecting things and, controlling things. Sometimes hypothalamus is also known as the boss. It controls a lot of different things. But if your body temperature rises above normal, so normal is what, 37 degrees C, so that you could think of it as a set point now. All right, set point, control center, that happen to be in the brain. All right, it controls that. All right, set point is 37 degrees C. But what if you're exercising? Now you're going higher, 38, 39, who knows? Maybe in hot days like today, it's going to be even hotter, okay? So there are thermoreceptors now. Thermoreceptors were part of the receptor. By the way, these lecture notes, you can access it. It's present in the Canvas. For those of you that don't have the access to Canvas, I'll give you access hopefully soon, and you'll be able to see those. All right, so what we discuss is the receptor. You have thermoreceptors. So when your thermoreceptor detect a higher temperature, you know, they signal the to do something about it. So they detect things. Well, what are you going to do about it? All right. Remember, I told you earlier, effector are muscles and glands. So yes, vasodilation is going to happen. Same thing as we discussed in here. By vasodilating, what happens is the heat is going to go to the extremity, so you could lose it throughout the environment. That's one. All right. If you notice, like, bodybuilders, when they exercise and so on, a lot of them, you see the blood vessels are kind of like getting dilated, and you could see that. But also glands. This would be a great example for the glands, because now your sweat glands are working. They're being stimulated. So as soon as the sweat glands start operating, that's what will happen. Your temperature is going to drop as the sweat evaporates from the surface of your body. You're cooling down. And again, yes, momentarily, maybe it went up more than 37 degrees, but now it's going towards the 70. So this one was high, now it's going low. But is it going to keep dropping? No. Pretty soon you achieve that and you're not going to sweat anymore. So you are at the optimal range now. That is homeostasis. Anytime in general you are going away from homeostasis, or you're either way, whether it's getting higher and higher or lower and lower, anytime you're going away from the set point and homeostasis, you're looking for diseases, you're looking for disorders. That's what happens. All right. So, interestingly enough, there are, let me give you another example. This is another example of a negative feedback mechanism. In the blood vessel, you have a set point. It's not changing much. For, let's say, glucose. Everybody know diabetic people, for example, they have high amount of glucose, sugar in their blood vessel. All right. They take the blood sample and sugar is way above the normal range. This, again, you don't need to know this number, but it ranges from 70 to 100 milligram per deciliter. That is the normal range for glucose at the fasting range. That means while you're not eating something, this is what you need to do. Of course, glucose is very important for other things such as fuel, energy purposes. Our body produces ATP or energy for a variety of purposes, for muscles to contract, for your nerve to fire, and for lots of different places, obviously. So glucose is really essential, but is it a good idea to keep adding? And why not just go ahead and eat honey all day long? Now things will get problematic because it's a Goldilocks rule. You do not want something very high, or you don't want your soup to be too hot or too cold. You want it just right. Okay, both of the extremes are problematic. Same thing in here. If you don't have enough glucose, you don't have enough energy, you'll be always sleepy, you're lacking energy that you need. If you have way too much glucose, yes, kids sometimes it gets hyper, but on top of that, your blood uh, sugar level, if it's high, what happens is you lose a lot of water, your blood pressure goes high. People that are diabetic, they use a restroom a lot often because they lose a lot of water. That's why. They're always thirsty. That's why. All right. So both of them is problematic, and that could cause a really serious problem because when the sugar level is high, usually you have a very high blood pressure too. And again, blood pressure, when it goes high, it could pop our blood vessels. Now you have internal bleeding, right? So all of them problematic. We wanted to maintain this. So what if you're eating a lot of donut? Well, if you eat a lot of donut with whipped cream, with a lot of stuff, all of that glucose is going to get absorbed in your bloodstream. Now it's too high. What are we going to do then? Well, you need to apply negative feedback. We need to bring this down. All right. This is where the pancreas uh, produce insulin. All right. And pancreas is producing insulin. And as a result of that, this glucose is going to be transported into the liver. Right? All right. This insulin is going to transport the extra glucose to the liver. When you take the glucose out of the blood, the glucose is going to achieve normal again, back to lowering it. And liver is going to take this glucose and save it in here as a form of glycogen. Glycogen is just many sugar together. It's called polysaccharides. Many polysaccharides means sugar. So a lot of this glucose is going to go to liver and store for us. Glucose is kind of like a money. Liver is kind of like a bank. You have extra money, put it in the bank, right? It's kind of like that, all right? But what if opposite happens? What if you are fasting? Huh? If you're fasting, your glucose level is going to drop, right? Well, you know, if let's say you don't eat for a day, you're really not going to die, all right? You still have some reserve energy, all right? You have some reserve energy. All right, again, the pancreas. All right, is gonna release glucagon. All right, glucagon is another hormone. That's what it is. All right, glucagon is another hormone that what it does, it causes the liver to break down the glycogen that we discussed to a glucose. So now as more breakdown of glycogen in the liver, basically what happens is they turn the breakdown into the glucose. Glucose is going to be higher now. Again, we're doing negative feedback. When it was low, bringing it back up high. So many examples. This would be the blood sugar level. We need to regulate. Blood sugar level need to be regulated. Try not to memorize these examples. These examples just to give you an idea, learn the concept. I think that would be more important. What other things we need to regulate in the blood? So many things. Think about it. Cholesterol needs to be regulated. Protein needs to be regulated. Amount of water needs to be regulated. Calcium, it needs to be regulated. Sodium needs to be regulated. Potassium everything needs to be regulated, folks. Homeostasis is the key. It's a balance. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of physiological problems. All right, let's take a look at one more example, and then I'll go back to the positive feedback. Let's say calcium. Calcium needs to be normal level. What if it's high? If it's high, the calcium is going to recede on the blood vessels, and again, it's going to make the diameter smaller and cause a lot of problems for us. That includes the blood pressure problem. All right. So what if the calcium is too low? Again, that's problematic too. We don't want that. We want calcium to be at the normal level. All right. We don't want to be low and too high. What happens if it's too low? Well, calcium has a lot of usage. It has usage for contraction on muscles. that includes many different type of muscle, cardiac muscle, smooth muscles, the skeletal muscle. They all need calcium. Calcium is required for bone development. Calcium required for firing action potential or nerve impulses, so in nerves, and many other places. So calcium is essential. When you don't have enough calcium, what's going to happen? A lot of things. All right. You can also have lower blood pressure, but other than that, nerves not going to have that much bone. They're not going to have the thickness. This is going to probably contribute to the osteoporosis. Contraction of the muscles. You might have a problem with muscle cramps. You might have problems in exercising. You're getting tired and so on. Not enough calcium there. That's why having a good diet is important. But how do we deal with that? Obviously, a negative feedback taught us something. When something is low, we need to bring it back up. When something is high, we need to lower it. Well, how are we going to achieve that? Let's take a look. Let me just grab. All right. So let's go ahead and take a look at the first scenario, huh? Calcium is too much. Whole thing is we need to lower it. That's what we know. Calcium has to be lower. All right, so in the thyroid, here's a thyroid. Thyroid is part of the lymphatic and immune system, but the thyroid gland, okay, produce something important. This is a hormone that is produced. It's called calcitonin. Calcitonin, all right? Calcitonin takes the extra money, or calcium in this case, all right, and takes it to the bone. All right. So, yes, this is after you use it for muscle, after you use it for contraction of the nerve. You need a certain supply, but still you have excess, and we don't want calcium to recede on the blood vessels. So what happens is if you have a calcitonin, enough calcitonin, what it's going to do is taking this extra calcium back into the bone kind of like a bank, you know, it can retain and remain thick, and you have sufficient amount of calcium. And again, you get that from the diet. All right. So many people with osteoporosis, they actually have a thyroid problem. They don't produce the calcitonin. So they go to the doctor and they get the calcitonin shots. Calcitonin shots. Why not just taking the calcium? Yeah, but you have to take this calcium to the bone, and the calcitonin does that for you. Otherwise, it's going to filter it into the kidney and end up in the urine. People popping up a lot of calcium pills, and they're hoping that, oh, I'm taking the calcium, so I shouldn't get this whole osteoporosis. Not necessarily, folks. All right, you need the hormone, you need the mechanism to deliver. All right. Just like you have a money. The money is just not going to walk into your bank. You got to go to the bank. You got to put in your code. Then you got to deposit it, right? It's kind of like that, folks. All right. All right. Next up, what if we have the opposite? What if you have a low calcium? And you have low calcium, then we need to increase the calcium. That is the necessity to have in our blood vessel. All right. So that pretend this is a blood vessel. All right. Now on the thyroid, next to it, there are parathyroid gland. There's 4 of them. Para means next to. Thyroid gland. Parathyroid gland produce parathyroid hormone, PTH, parathyroid hormone. What does the parathyroid hormone do? Parathyroid hormone activates osteo means bone, clast cells. Osteoclast cells are for bone resorption. In anatomy, you learn about osteocytes, osteoclast, and probably osteoblast. This one is osteoclast. All right. Osteoclast, interestingly enough, osteoclast are for they're multinucleated cells that they are involved and break down the bone. All right, so they kind of like nibble and they break down the bone and is responsible for what's known as a bone resorption. This is for bone resorption. Bone resorption means breaking, bone breaking. All right. So what is happening? PTH is going to go to the bone. Right here is the bone, right, and it causes the bone to break. As the bone breaks, calcium release. And that's what we want. We wanted to increase the calcium. Now, normally, osteoclast activity is similar to the osteoblast activity, or making of the bone and breaking of the bone is similar rates. So the bone doesn't get thinner, they don't get thicker. That's if normal homeostasis, right? But if you have more than one bone resorption, say, for example, you're not getting a calcium from your diet and you have deficiency in calcium and so on, your bone is paying the price. They're getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And this is contributor factors to the osteoporosis, as you know. But the whole idea was to do the negative feedback. All right. We learn about negative feedback. Then what is the positive feedback then? Positive feedback, instead of counteracting the change, if it's low, making it high, if it's high, making it low, this time, if it's low, you're going lower. If it's high, you're going higher. So you are responding to enhance the original stimulus, whatever that is. So if, for example, this doesn't happen, but for example, if your temperature is high, instead of lowering it, you get higher and higher and higher. Now you might say, well, why do I need that? Well, again, a lot of these positive feedback eventually ends with the negative feedback. But one good example would be the enhancement of the labor contraction by oxytocin. When a female giving birth, the uterus contracts, and this uterus contraction causes the person going into the labor so the baby can come out. So if your oxytocin is going up a little bit, you really don't want it to lower it, like at a negative feedback, because if it's high and lower it, now you're not going to get contraction anymore. And if you don't have maximum contraction, guess what? Baby's not going to be delivered, right? So oxytocin is going to go higher. And then again, that might give you a little bit more contraction, but you need even more than that. So oxytocin keeps going up and up and up and up until you get the maximum contraction, and hopefully the baby will come out, and that's it. What about after that? Well, after that, you probably don't need so much oxytocin. And again, the problem, it goes back to the negative feedback. Another example is the platelet plug formation and the blood clotting that can occur. In here, the blood vessels looks like has damaged and blood is losing. And the platelets or blood clotting, they try to kind of like come in and plug in this area, as you can imagine. All right. But here's the deal. If you plug, now these are platelets and there are some proteins too. They're aggregating. So now you have higher amount of platelets. But do we want to stop at this point in time? You might have not plugged fully yet. If you stop, it's still leaking. All right. Microorganism can come in now. You know, you could have more infection. You could have low blood pressure because your blood is still leaving, all right? But we want the full plug to form. So they're completely full. These are platelets that are completely full. Now, no more leakage. Again, negative feedback. Why not continue? Because if you continue and you don't apply negative feedback, then there will be platelets everywhere. Now, you're not going to be able to go back and forth. The pressure is going to get really messed up. You are blocking the flow, as you can imagine. All right. So that's not a good thing either. All right. So the idea is, yes, increasing platelets. We want to get more and more platelets. So you got even more platelets in here, but to the certain limit. At one point in time, it stops, and negative feedback applies, so you don't get more.